Hello, everybody. James here, and it is, of course, Franchise University with Shane Douglas. There he is, the franchise himself, the most famous three fingers that will go whatever way, whatever way they're going to go this week. So we're going to be very quick. We're going to be talking about NWA TNA episode 62, or as one website described it, 61. So it's a bit confusing which number this damn thing is, but it was September 17th, 2003. We left off talking about Mad Mikey and Shark Boy versus Simon Diamond and Johnny Swinger. And the reason why I picked this episode for Shane and I to watch and review is because Shane is, of course, in the main event against Raven and Hair versus Hair match. We will be talking about that later because damn, there's a lot to talk about that episode as well. It is one match, and let me tell you, there's a lot of things that go on and go in and go out, the whole bit. But for now, we're going to talk about the semi-main event. NWA champion AJ Styles versus Jerry Lynn. There is a promo vignette leading up to it. Lynn seems to be getting a title shot for a reason that I'm not quite sure why. I suppose if you're watching every week, it'd be more obvious, but we're not. But the nicest guy in wrestling, Jerry Lynn. So I've never had the pleasure, never spoke to Jerry, but from everyone else I hear, is Jerry's a top man.
Almost as nice as me. Jerry's on a different level nicely. Like me, if I get angry about something, I'll use about 96 F-bombs. You ask Jerry about it, and he'll go, oh, yeah. And that's him like being me, 96 F-bombs. Yeah, he's pretty. You don't want to check for a pulse on Jerry. He's even keeled guy, but he's a good dude.
Yeah, we keep bringing up people who have seemingly all the tools to make it bigger in the business, and maybe Jerry falls into that as well, where he had a good run in the last year or two in ECW, especially, you know, his matches with Rob Van Dam. Some great matches as well. And he comes up at the same time as Sean Waltman, I believe, in the Indies when they're both kids. And I suppose just more stories about Jerry, really, because at the moment he's a producer agent with AEW, so he's been around in the business for longer than I've been watching, that's for certain. Yeah.
Jerry's one of those guys. I never liked the Mr. JL thing.
Oh, God, I forgot about that.
You know, it was just, Jerry is, I think, because of his personality, when you meet him and talk to him, he's so like my youngest son, they have this term now, he's chill, right? Jerry was chill before chill was cool. But it's just, he's not a very over the top guy in much of what he does. But when you watch him in the ring, whether under the mask or not, and you'd watch it and you'd think, man, he's like really going at it. And that little extra grit of effort, like when he would, have him up, getting ready to hit his driving pile driver, and he would reach, hook him, and then there'd be the reach over, and then he had all the mannerisms, all the expressions, and that grit that really stick to it and go at it. That was what was missing, I think, with the JL, was like that was being lost. Like you couldn't see that part of Jerry. But later, when he would get the opportunity to work with Rob, and we had talked about Rob, I think, last episode, about how, just really stick to his guns on things that he wasn't. Straight up, what I would say, like in the world I come from, he's a straight up man. And those two had such a great chemistry and knew exactly how to play off of each other, that it really, there's those rare instances in your career where you have those matches with that perfect opponent, and that it just sort of goes into auto glide, it just sort of happens. And that was what it always looked like when those two worked to me, was that there were, you never got the impression that they were out there doing spots to get the match over. It always looked to me like they were both working to win the match, which is what it's supposed to look like. And because like Jerry, Rob had a fairly decent push in WCW, would get much more later, and then of course his huge run in WWF. But Jerry had never quite had that. Jerry was sort of that, like nobody really quite knew what he had to offer. And you go back and you watch him, Jerry's never going to go out and put himself over in an interview. He's probably not even going to talk about himself. And if he does, he might say something like, I was pretty good. I was okay. And he's not going to toot his own horn. But Jerry was one of those guys, like for me, as the mouthpiece for the company. When you saw him come in, you realize, like, man, this guy's the fans would love him, right? Because those fans in the ECW arena were looking for that little extra grit, that little extra effort, that 11 out of a 12 attempt. 11 out of 10 attempt that, you're really putting that extra into it. And I think a lot of the guys, especially in that X division or more recently Spot Monkey stuff, where they're just so adept at doing it that they do it and just glide onto the next thing and do it and glide onto the next thing. Jerry made it look, next thing. Like it was always that bam, like right at the end of it. And that's what I'm talking about. That I can't even put the right word to it, but that grit, that effort. It's the Bret Hart wrenching back and veins in his neck bulging when he's got Steve Austin in the sharpshooter. Jerry had that, and you never saw that under the JL mask. And suddenly here he is in ECW, smaller, okay, yeah, but again, ECW sort of blurred that line. So by the time Jerry starts getting that run, and then of course when he gets the run with Rob, Rob was at the peak of his game, and Jerry was coming into the peak of his game. And so those were the matches that I used to love to watch, for the TV title. So it was usually on before mine. I could sit down and that would just get me in the right frame, because you knew they were going to have a long match. You knew they were going to have a good match. And it also gave you some ideas of like, okay, let's not repeat this. Let's not that I could do a lot of the moves that those guys could do, but let's not repeat the same kind of story, the same kind of psychology. Tell it a little bit different. And those guys never failed to drive the exclamation point and then scratch that into the concrete at the end of the sentence. But they left it open for you to be able to follow it so that you could do the main event coming after that. They didn't go out there and hit everything in the kitchen sink. Just real pros, both of them. And Jerry's one of those guys, again, that I think when we sit there and we talk, who's your Mount Rushmore? There's those guys that we often just don't even pop into our head because they're like not in that place in our head. But when you go back and watch Jerry's work and him and his temperament, and you see what he's delivering out there, like, man, you'd be hard pressed to watch any of those matches that he and Rob had and go, okay, that was a good match, but, and then give some backhanded compliment or criticism. They took it out there and elevated the bar for ECW, for all of us. And that was important to a company the size of ECW at that time.
Now, AJ versus Jerry Lynn, the two matches beforehand where we talked about last week, it was, we barely talked about it. It was just a 6-man, and it was X Division was like, you have a go, then you have a go, and and then someone wins, and that's that. Whereas you can really see far more quality shine through, which is ostensibly an X Division match, because AJ Styles and Jerry Lynn, neither are going to be heavyweights in pro wrestling standards at the time. But there's something far more hard-hitting. I'll give you a couple of things. Too many big moves to mention, except Lynn folds up AJ Styles with a running powerbomb that looked a little scary because he landed quite high up, but I've always got in my mind the whole draws thing, specifically with that move. A fine brain buster from Styles too. Trinity interferes after the Kryptonite Crunch, but AJ puts his foot on the rope anyway, because I guess AJ didn't trust Trinity to do it. But neck breaker on a chair, kick out, then AJ hits a Styles Clash for the clean win. A very good match, and apparently contemporary reports said it was one of their worst matches of that year. So if that's their worst match, then crikey, think about how great the great matches are. Right. Then afterwards, a legit tough guy, Vince Russo, I've written here, turns up in his black pajamas again with a baseball bat to congratulate AJ and demands an answer from Don Callis regarding he or Piper in TNA. Then country music plays, Dusty Rhodes comes out, walks out, and the fans chant, "We want Flair," which did make me laugh. Dusty says he'll stick the bat up AJ's ass. Dusty says AJ and Russo's decision to leave is on them and not TNA, baby. Dusty tries to talk AJ into dumping Russo. AJ hands the bat to Dusty, and then AJ attacks Dusty. Basically, AJ stays with Vince Russo. And then Roddy Piper comes out and then is taken away by security, because at this time there are two competing backstage security teams as well, which I also didn't know, but I had to look up to find out afterwards. Mike Tenay and Don West run down the card. Then it's to the back. Callis throws Piper out of the asylum. Jarrett is angry and Lapel grabs Callis. Now, here we go. Here's the main event. There is a vignette. Raven and Shane Douglas. The build-up, including Shane cutting Raven's hair partially, which I didn't realise had happened, like a week or two beforehand. So there's going to be some backstage information on the whole hair versus hair thing that I don't know you'll know, which hopefully will surprise you. Raven says he isn't ashamed. He enjoyed it. You cutting his hair and beating him up, I guess. Shane doesn't run with scissors. Kiss your hair, then your career goodbye. Time to get your ass franchised. Raven. Scott Hudson is with Shane Douglas and Jim Mitchell. Now, we talked about Jim Mitchell in a completely different capacity a few weeks ago in NWA Sarwin. I can never say Sam Hain, but I would really want to. Did you watch the promo beforehand?
My promo or no,
James Mitchell's. You don't really talk with the Scott Hudson one, but yes, Jim Mitchell.
Yes, Jim was. When they put us together, it seemed like it wouldn't work because I was known as a promo guy, and James, again, my character came from a different place. Like he wasn't like the acolyte type follower type of thing. But once I got to know James, like he and I hung out several times after the shows, and we just sit and talk. And I thought, okay, well, this maybe gives me some like fresh legs, gives me someplace different, like to push, and find new ground for that character. By that time had been, a huge part of my career. And let's face it, James is pretty amazing at promos. His whole look and that whole thing, just, I think to the average viewer, when you watch him deliver a promo, because of his, the long black hair and the pointed eyebrows, and I mean, he looks like he's right out of a movie about Satan, right? It's he's so compelling on that microphone that's what sort of sucked me into it and agreed to, like, okay, let's go along with it. Let's see where it goes, because I thought it could have some fresh legs to my character.
Jim. He's another person, where we say, when you're Mount Rushmore, no one ever mentions someone. But as a manager, I really rate Jim. He had a great character in TNA, well, in ECW with the Sinister Minister, I guess. He had a great character from then on in, and was a great talker. And I think he just knew how to be a pure manager. And he's one of the last of that breed.
Yes, very much so. And what you're alluding to there is that manager, running that mouth and getting his stuff in during the match and, doing whatever he's going to do to the babyface, in this case, setting Raven up for these falls or whatever. It almost takes on a sort of religious undertone, right? Like, Raven's trying to exorcise himself of these demons in his life. And, here you got this guy bringing him right back to his doorstep. It was overt without being overt, if that makes sense. It was in your face. I mean, Scotty had by that time had talked publicly somewhat about his demons and the attempt to rid himself of those. And it was, again, one of those things like a Piper thing where, he's talking about it and taking it up to the level. And then James would masterfully pull right up to that and lay some line down in the promo where you'd have to think about, like, why did you say that? And then dig it through. But I think James had the inauspiciousness of being probably a little bit too good at what he did. And I think that there was a tendency to, by that time, okay, like, let's start to downsize the managers and, push them aside. Where James had come up in the business at the right time, and he's, watching all these amazing managers before him. And he knew exactly where to set himself up to be knocked down. And that's, from a manager standpoint, especially today, there's few managers that understand that. It's not just about getting there and choke the baby face and cheat and help your guy win. It's about ultimately setting yourself up to no matter what you're endeavoring to put the baby face through, you're going to end up putting yourself through it because the baby face is just that one step ahead at the right time. James was masterful at setting that kind of stuff up at a time when I think the business by and large was beginning to downsize those rules of the managers and take some of the shine off of them.
And here we are, main event, Shane Douglas versus Raven, hair versus hair. I've realised that the facts I've written about this, that hopefully will surprise you, is actually after the main body of the match description. Perfect Strangers knockoff. Where does this rank in the Perfect Strangers knockoffs, this one or WCW's? They weren't the same, were they?
And slightly different. I think more of it, as I recall, was baseline. They all had the keyboard lead in or some simile of that. And it was close enough. I mean, by this time we had gotten to the point where, ECW had pretty much worn out its welcome as far as illegally using music. And, those guys, they did the best they could, I think, with that. It's it becomes an iconic song, not just, with my entrance, but that was a huge, huge hit that brought Black Sabbath back to the forefront and has been a mainstay of theirs ever since.
Black Sabbath? Deep Purple?
Or Deep Purple. I said Black Sabbath. Yeah, Deep Purple.
You just tested me there,
Shane. That was a good test for you. I was just checking to see chair shots. As be only. Trust me, I know the difference between Sabbath and Deep Purple.
Now,
Ian Glover and Ozzy Osbourne.
That's one of the worst attempts at Brummy accent.
Yeah, I'm horrible at it.
Right, so Raven's push in TNA is maybe a philosophical booking problem because he wasn't pushed very much at all. He was a B show mainstay at Heat, WWF Heat. Then he goes to TNA and he's treated like a title contender. Booking-wise, how do you sort of get over that to where it doesn't make TNA look like a C show compared to WWF Heat B show, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I think what you're alluding to is with the character, his character, based on his ECW run and later his WWF run, was he is meant to be he's meant to be the antithesis, right? So the anti-hero. And when he was doing his promos in ECW, I remember thinking to myself, like, man, he's great at that. Very, very different style than mine. But each time you feel yourself being pulled into that promo, you're going to go along and waft along to all the ups and downs and twists and turns because he's just got that magnetic delivery that's going to just sort of suck you in. I think the biggest problem for me with the character is it's just not a babyface character. And when he starts to become that babyface character, like in this match, he's doing everything right. Much like in the show we had several episodes ago, the Clash of Champions, when he's on there and he wrestled Scorpio. Yeah, I was thinking. I had the Mick match in my head. Watch him moving around in that, and you can see, like much like I said about Mick before, Scotty has all the basic tools, right? His positioning, his movement, he knows where to bring it up and slow it down. He's got all that. But when he came into this character in ECW, the Raven character, quote the Raven nevermore, it just really sucked you in. And there was, I always said, those most dangerous heels are the ones that can tell you that, I chopped a person's head off, but let me explain why I had to chop their head off. And at the end, you go, well, okay, it's still crazy, but I see his point. And with Raven, you could always sort of see his point. And the way he would deliver, no matter what crazy thing it was they were doing, he'd get you to, at least on that edge going, okay, I wouldn't, but I get it. And, it was so, what's the word I want to use here? It was so compelling to watch that to suddenly take that and throw it out, and okay, now you're going to be here to be the good guy. And so forget about all those crazy things I said and all those compelling talks I gave you. Now get behind me and root for me. And I think that's probably a lot of heels that yearn for that, because you've heard boos for so long. You want to get that one run right here. Hooray. He doesn't, as that character doesn't work for me. A few weeks ago, when you see him in the Clash of Champions match, I bought him completely as a babyface. It's like you're watching along and going, okay, this is a good match.
He was a heel in that, wasn't he? Scotty Flamingo was a heel because he was against Scorpio, who dances with kids.
Technically a heel, but if you watch him in his turning, it is like he's feeding in and he's coming back and almost making comebacks in the middle of the spots and things. But he, by the time he has the ECW run, that was so iconic that it's really hard to undo that and say we're going to suddenly make you the guy the fans are rooting for. It just, no matter how hard I'm trying, it almost looks to me like when I'm watching the match, the playback and the post delivery, the post birth, it's almost like too much of an attempt to try to push it that way. But he I guess in a nutshell, and maybe it's because I just know him too well and I was too sucked in by the original version of that character. I just can't buy him as a babyface. There's nothing he's doing wrong. If anything, he's working his ass off in that role. And the A, B, C, D, the semantics of it are all there. But he's just so indelible, that character in my head, that it's really tough for me to make that leap and say, okay, now we're going to go with it. To your point, when you try to pretend in wrestling that the other guys don't exist, somehow just abracadabra poof, forget everything you remember, we're now here. It's such a disservice to the fans. Yeah, it's maybe more convenient for your booking if that's the way you want to go. But I've always maintained convenient isn't necessarily good. We're only limited by this up here. So take me on a bit of a ride to get me there. Explain it to me. So why this guy should be suddenly the hero. And maybe I can buy it. But like you said, the B show in WWF then, and now suddenly
I'm going to be technical. It was E. I can't help it. I've got to.
Was it E then? Okay.
Yeah.
What year's the separation?
May 2002. Okay, I hate to, because I've already cut out one version of my question, which went about 14 years. I had a birthday during the anyway, I edited it out. So essentially, how do you rehab an image from you're presented as a jobber to the stars on one show, and then 2 days later you are presented as a main eventer? How do you get from A to B without basically harming your own company in the with the image in that sense? I found a good way of asking it finally, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, the short answer is you can't. I mean, you can, and then it broaches all other sorts of questions that come up to that. That's to do that and do it properly. You've got to take that character and take them on a journey before you get to the point of suddenly just plugging them in. But I think it again is this whole penchant for the industry, not just TNA, but for the entire industry to pretend, okay, like there was ECW before ECW, and now there's ECWC Common Era. So like we're before and after, and like this stuff in between didn't happen. And at that point, you're just really you're setting up the undermining of your own angle, because you're expecting everybody to just somehow mass hypnosis and forget that this other thing happened. Incorporate it, use it, talking about it, but make it make sense. We tell the younger kids in the business all the time, I don't care what the moves are in between, just make it make sense. And if you do that, then the rest will fall into place. And yet when it comes to those bigger things like that, there's just this sort of waving of the magic wand, abracadabra, poof, he's here. Now he's the hero. And so we'll put this smarmy heel out there and run his mouth, and put James out there to do a great promo, and somehow it'll just fall into place and work. Again, when you watch the match, you can't see really anything that Raven's doing incorrectly in that role. It's just that he's got this huge shadow behind him as this character that was this just prior, and now you're trying to say, okay, just forget all that. It doesn't work, and it's lazy booking. It cheapens it, and to me, there would have been so much more compelling television to take that character on that run. Okay, here you weren't so successful. What makes you think you can be here? And take that journey before you start to plug them into that top spot. And again, shame on TNA. It's just cheap and cheesy and shortcutting it, hot shotting it, if you were. And in the final analysis, I guess people that do that have the audacity to think to do that in a booking position. There's I always talk about these condescensions, right? There's a condescension there to the fans, but there's also an aggrandizement of your own powers as a booker. Like, we could just do this and they're going to forget all that. And with all due respect, that's the NFL of our industry. So they're not going to just forget about all that. And that comes there. And that's it's like, remember the old, you're too young of it, Robert Conrad, the guy in how the West was won. They have or the Wild Wild West, rather. He would put the commercial on, go ahead, I dare you, knock it off. You're doing that to the fans. And as you know, from the fans that do this kind of thing and have really written books about the business and follow, and they come to the conventions and signings and everything. Wrestling fans have that certain segment of them have an undying love for professional wrestling, and they're not going to go, okay, well, I'm just going to erase that from my memory bank and then just pick up here and go from there. It's cheesy, it's cheap, it's lazy, and it deprives the fans of what you need most. You being the promotion, you need footage, you need television content to feel that it would make sense. And by cheapening it, you just cut out 16, 20 weeks of television you could have done to get there.
Now, let's do the match itself. Do you want me to talk anything about it, or do you just want to take it?
No, go right in. I'll plug in where.
Okay, so face off. The crowd's big into it. I mean, they're more into it than the NWA title match from before. Feels it feels, even though it's a fairly small venue, it feels big time. People are cheering very, very vociferously. Nothing but a face off for like a couple of minutes. Nothing but punches then, and then ins and outs of the ring and outside brawling. All very easy stuff. It's just basic storytelling, and the fans are reacting. You don't need to do any more than that. Yeah. Now, the fans like it. Stripper likes it. Because there's one bit where there's just a stripper just going through the bars, just grinning at me, which is funny.
There's a scene in Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies, the most recent version, the final version of it, where all this stuff is going on in the prison. There's zombies and there's wrestlers running from the zombies. And for no explanation or reason at all, there's a lady with no top on running down a trail in the middle of the woods somewhere. And then it cuts back to well, where the hell did that, like, what was that? Like, it's almost like you're watching a movie and somebody like cut into your cable for 13 seconds and then it's gone again. And that was that's how I saw this, like, like, what did that have to do with the match? I just sort of throw it in there.
Hey, well, she was into it. Why not? Actually, I missed one bit out. So Raven keeps giving fans chairs to hold and then rams your head into it. Does it 2 or 3 times. The fans are enjoying it. Back into the ring. Raven hits a Cobra clutch, and Mike TNA covers this by saying that Raven was talking to Mark Lewin earlier that week to perfect the submission. What a funny callback.
Yeah. I don't know if that was something that Raven had talked to him about, or if he knew the history with Lewin and that, because that is really like back there. That's like that's deep in the annals of wrestling history, right? And because when he started saying that he was on the phone, he had a phone call earlier this week. I'm thinking for sure he's going to say Sergeant Slaughter and go on, right?
Or Ted DiBiase, who had the same thing, or even Steve Austin, who used it. But yeah, Mark Lewin, what a callback!
Yeah, I was like, man, it goes back in there. But I thought Mike was an exceptional play-by-play guy. Really good at what he did. And, he, in that line, last time I was there watching on Moose's phone, and when he hit the line, I looked away from the spot. I was like, man, I didn't expect that. Like you said, there were a couple names I would have thought first prior to that. But, And I'm sure there's probably wrestling fans going, he meant Sergeant Slaughter or DiBiase or somebody. But yeah, just one of those nuggets thrown in there that for those that did their homework realize, well, he's right. There's a connection there.
There's later on in the match, there's an abdominal stretch battle, which I'd also never seen before. I'm surprised TNA didn't say Wilbur Snyder took a phone call with these two guys at the same time.
Shane Douglas was talking to Wilbur Snyder earlier this week.
Call back. Have that. Let me have so Raven's taken nearly all of the match, which I suppose in hindsight, because I know that Raven gets his head shaved, makes all the sense in the world, because if you're losing, you're basically going to take 90% of the match to keep your heat, I guess.
Yeah.
Shane ends up busted open on the steps. Raven then gets busted open on the steps straight away. I want to mention this very briefly. Jerry Lynn bleeds in the prior match. Is that an issue if he knows that you guys are going to be bleeding in the main event?
My guess is that was a drop ball from, because I saw that piece and thought that my guess would be the company dropped the ball. Either they didn't know Jerry was getting color, or Jerry didn't know we were getting color. Somewhere the message didn't cross the lines, because it really shouldn't have been. There's no need to do that, and it detracts somewhat from it. But you should have had him back to back, and that I think it's just a drop ball. Which again, go figure.
Yeah, Jerry bleeds a gusher as well then. Anyway, we'll move on. Shane finally gets the upper hand, taunts a fan with Raven's blood on his hand. So you just go, it's actually next to the girl who looked like Chastity that Frankie Kazarian was chatting up prior. Then the abdominal stretch, which, as I say, just one of those just basic maneuvers where you actually fight over it and it means something, which is definitely interesting. You throw him out of the ring. Raven gets back I'm sorry.
Which was a hell of a bump from his point of view. Yeah. We typically would have readjusted once we got into that position and gotten closer to the ropes. And although I'd like to say I was strong enough to throw a guy his size that far, that really is Scotty working. And he was present of mind enough to know he was close enough that he could get to the rope. The downside of his, again, on the physics, by the time he's already so far away from the rope that to clear the rope, but now he's got to come down, and he comes down and he hits that apron hard. And, and he completely no-sold it. So it may have been just one of those things that looked worse than it was. But as somebody who's done that several times in your career, that hurts like hell. And it looks to me like he comes right down on his hip bone on that. But if you watch a second later, he's not really selling it. So, but yeah, and I think TNA calls it out on the, he in a second or two, he mentions it. He came down hard on the apron. But he really hits it hard if you watch it back. But it's so quick, and the camera angle, which is one of the things that I'll let you finish now. I'll go give my
no. Well, I was just going to say Raven gets back in the ring, and then it happens.
What are you talking about?
You beat your fucking guts out.
So I've told that story, and I think last night was the first time I watched that match back. Validates everything I said in the previous. On Wednesdays when we do these shows, I would drink. We talked in a previous episode about energy drinks. I would drink Diet Red Bulls all day, and wouldn't eat. And because if you look closely, you see you're starting to get a little bit puffy around the midsection, and not a little bit soft here and there. And so I would do that to try to lean out a little bit. I would eat like early the day before, and then not late. And then the next day I would drink the Red Bulls all day. And that building, what you really can't tell, and you can never tell from a viewer standpoint, is the fairgrounds in Nashville. That building is just it's a barn setup type building for farm expositions and things. So there's no air conditioning in the building. Well, by that time of the night, you've had television cameras and lights going all day, for several hours. And the crowd, it's thick in there, and it's hot, and it's steamy, and it's humid. And this match, by my estimation, on that spot on the card, we didn't need that much time to tell that story. And, we're going to a pretty simple place. I think we could have shaved probably a good 5 minutes off of that. and still gotten everything in we needed to tell that story. But I throw him in. We're on the floor. We come back in, and I throw him back in, and you'll see me hesitate there for a second. I throw a mouthful up at ringside, and I think I'm fine once I've got that mouthful out. So I come in again, and when I cover him, if you watch Scotty closely, he's watching me, and he sees it starts to heave again, so he rolls away from under it. And if you look at what I'm throwing up, there's no chunks, there's no food in there. It's just all clear liquid. And it's really, it was just the heat in that building, the fact that I'm drinking those energy drinks all day, and something was going to give. It was either coming out the backside if I held on to it a little bit longer, or like that. And but I thought Tenay, and look, you can't ignore that on camera, right? You're commentating on a match. And by that point in the match has gone on for a while, and they've fought around the building and this and that. So by pretending it didn't happen, and Raven's doing this, blah, 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 call what's on the screen. There'll probably be some guys go, hey, like, don't call it out on me. I think in the way that I viewed that last night, that sort of underscored to the match, like as hard nosed and hot the building was and all of that. That, and then where we're going with it afterwards, that just sort of spells again to me from a wrestling psychology point of view, in front of the fans, trying to guess what the fans think they're going to see. They see this going on and they think, okay, perfect foil. Did they give him something to make him throw up during the match, or did he throw something in his mouth? And is this part of the story? And no, it was just hot building, too many Diet Red Bulls. And when out there at ringside, I said, you'll see me bend over for a second, and it looks like I'm spitting because like a literal mouthful came up, and I just spit to clear my mouth out. And as I'm climbing back in, I could feel it starting to roll again. And I'm like, oh, let's see. And then the second mouthful comes up, and then the third. So there's one at ringside, and there's two inside the ring. And that is exactly what happened there. It was Diet Red Bulls on an empty stomach in a hot building in a long, grueling match. Not the best mix.
So when did you start feeling it's coming?
Literally when I
just when it happened.
First mouthful. Yeah, I mean, I was fine before that, and it was like, it's just like you feel like it's coming its way up. What I'm guessing is that stuff was foaming up in my belly, right? And so I'm getting thrown around, and it's shaking up in here. Bloop, it's just mouthful comes and go, okay, better. And then I'm coming in the ring, I can feel it again coming up. And at that point, like, there's no reason to try to kayfabe it. Like, I got to roll out of the ring and put my head under the ring or something. Why? To me, again, in hindsight, and I wish I had the presence of mind at that moment to say, this is why I did it. I stayed in the ring because that's, to me, underscoring this match. Raven's really given it to me. And even through that, and again, I think Mike really covers it up well, not covers it up, but comments on it well, and says, such a grueling match, but Shane Douglas still has the presence of mind too, blah, blah, blah. And, go with it. Like, you try to pretend it didn't happen. It's just those things that we've seen how many times when you're watching a match and something just blatantly obvious happens, or the camera catches something and they, hey, what's that over there? Oh, by the way, we're back to the match now. It looks ridiculous. And Mike Tenay, I remember coming up to the end, what happened? And he said, I'm so sorry. And he told me to comment. I said, good. You should have commented on it. It's there. And in hindsight, it plays off exactly like in my head, like it should have played in the story of telling that match.
Now,
excuse me, get ready to do
it. just one mouthful. You're probably like me. If I'm going to puke, I'm gonna get it all out there. I don't understand people who like throw up and go and do a tiny bit. And I just go woof and just puke up half my lungs and stuff. So, not that you want to know, but you know now. Anyway, Raven kicks out of a chair to the head. Then Shane kicks out of a drop toe hold onto the chair. Then at this point, I note there's a lot of talking going on in the ring. Do you remember the back and forth that's happening, or for what reason?
No. I saw that too last night, and I was wondering myself, and I have no recollection of what it was being said about, whether it was. I know we had to get two tables set up in due time, and while we had the run in, but I can't recall what the commentary was there. It might have been Ravens asked me, "Are you okay to go on?" I don't know, but there was, and by that time, I think when you see somebody in the ring in a compromised position, and then you see them get back on track, that pretty much tells you that that's past. And we talked in a previous episode about like a doctor at ringside being aware and paying attention. We're probably our own best doctors in that sense. Like I'm well aware of whether I can continue on or not. And, because of where we were going, we could have gotten there much quicker and 1,000 times faster if we would have had to. Like if, let's say I'd gotten the flu or I'd, eaten something bad that was, going to keep me thrown up. But we don't want to stay in the ring and do 10 blowjobs in the ring at, hurling, not blowjobs, for not the right word to use, right? Maybe ixnay that word, but, blow chunks. That's what I'm looking for. So my guess would be that part of what it was, but can't recall.
That's 10 blowjobs in the ring might be NWA's next pay-per-view gimmick. Now,
certain people become world champion that way, I understand, but it's
the Patterson Memorial Championship. We'll move on then. Wolfie D breaks up a pin. He's called Sin or something, but he's Wolfie D. Yeah. Anyway, even though Douglas kicked out as well. So that's the second time then there's meant to be interference, but then the person kicks out for whatever reason. Just to, to be sure. New Church interfere, referee down. Julio De Niro and CM Punk come down to even the odds. Now, here's the fun fact. A Ring of Honor match between Raven and CM Punk, who were feuding on Ring of Honor, yet friends in TNA. So, you think about that. They were, so that's crazy. On September 6th, they were supposed to be in a hair versus hair match 11 days earlier. Now,
wow.
TNA and Jeff Jarrett specifically prevented this from happening. And I believe Jeff said, Raven, if you lose your hair in this match with CM Punk, then you will not welcome back in TNA until your hair grows back. So
I did not know that.
No. So there you go. And Raven ended up not doing that stipulation. They did like a cage match or something instead. So, I thought that was going to be a little fun fact for you, that weirdly, 2 hair versus hair matches are going to happen at the same time. I'll probably ask about CM Punk another time, because there's plenty of time for CM Punk stuff. We're going to stick with the match here. Shane kicks out of a DDT. Shane reverses superplex onto table by shoving Raven through the table. It's basically just like a push, really. And then Raven kicks out and rolls into your vomit. And then Raven DDTs Shane Douglas through the table. And here's another thing. The lights go out, ECW style. And it's 1, 2. But the lights don't quite go out in time, because then I see your arm go straight up, just, for insurance sake, even though Mike Tenay says, well, Raven had Shane beat, which he didn't in that sense. And then the lights go on, and a mystery man who has been terrorizing TNA for months finally reveals himself to be Vampiro. We're going to speak about Vampiro very briefly in a second, but apparently it was originally going to be Ricky Banderas, but no one's really heard of him. He's not very famous. Then Terry Funk was considered, and then also CM Punk was considered, because, hey, he's feuding with him on Ring of Honor. It actually makes sense. Vampiro hits a DDT, and Shane gets the pin and holds onto his stomach, which you are holding onto your storyline tie. And at no point was the match ever...
Actually, I was holding my elbow.
Oh, were you really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Pardon me.
That was right around the time that I had just had the surgery. I think when I was in Florida, I had the 8th surgery on that elbow. And if you notice, I was wearing the brace, the rubber neoprene sleeve on it. Mm-hmm. And it had worked down during the match. And a couple times earlier in the match... I kick out of something, and I roll over and go like that. And I know I'm holding the elbow. I can't remember what happened, but it's definitely holding the elbow. And when I came back up after the match, same thing. My guess is it was probably related to that surgery. There was a nerve they had to release off for the earlier surgeries, and it wasn't hurt like broken hurt or anything like that. It was hurt like, ouch, like the nerve is still active in there, and still going. But Yeah, that's what was going on there.
I do apologize for getting that wrong. I want to stick with Vampiro here because apparently this was a surprising hire, because Vampiro and Jeff Jarrett may have had heat after Jarrett supposedly refused to drop the WCW US title back to him in 2000. You remember anything about this?
I remember there being a time when like there was, rumors about like being unwilling to drop, that sort of thing. I don't specifically remember about Vampiro, but Vampiro to me has always been like the pro guy, played that character very well and had, a lot of success with it. They needed somebody, like you said, they needed somebody like, to me, when the lights were out, I had totally forgotten that it was Vampiro. And so I'm waiting like everybody else watching it, like, who is it? And it went on long to the kick out. It was not supposed to be a kick out. But when you're in that position, laying there, I'm watching the lights because I can clearly see the lights. And if it's, the 1 and the 2 and the hand is coming down for the 3rd and the lights are still on, well, if he hits that 3, the fans know the match is over and we have to get to this other place. So that's just like as an insurance thing. And, whoever got it just a split second too late, and which necessitated me kicking out. The when Vampiro, when it came on, it seemed disparate to me. Like it didn't, like there was something he fit in with the Jim Mitchell, but it just seemed like almost like a piece that didn't belong here at that moment. But Vampiro, I'd be surprised if there was any kind of heat like that. It may have been on Jeff's mind, or if he had done that. But Vampiro, like it's the same thing I said earlier about like winning and losing. Like nobody's gonna really like end a friendship or refuse to work for somebody because this happened or didn't happen. So I wouldn't know firsthand on that, but it seems to be like that seems like an embellishment at least.
Vampiro was an absolute stone cold megastar in Mexico, and never really so in the States. He had, his probably most famous run was in WCW, and he feuded with Sting for a bit in the latter days there. But for some reason, Vampiro, is it just something like he's just underappreciated north of the border kind of thing? Because he clearly knows how to get over.
Oh yeah, big time. Vamp knows his way around that ring, and he's a pro's pro. I think, and again, this is just like my 2 cents worth. Lucha is very different in Mexico, hence all the masks, and there's a whole tradition behind all of that. It's that we in the States here don't quite get. And so Vampiro, plays off the Day of the Dead and has, it plays well into the Lucha storylines. And if you remember when they came here, like in WCW, they had the Misfits coming in, and they were great to work with, professional, easy. But it was almost like, because that big part of all that lore that is behind Lucha Libre in Mexico, that not that it didn't translate because Vamp's work stood on its own. It was expecting that, I guess the promoters were expecting that lore would all come with it. And there was, unfortunately, when the luchadors came north, there wasn't a lot of conversation about why the masks and, what's the tradition and, what is the whole saga behind all of that. And, for Vamp, like the makeup and everything it plays, you could see right off the Day of the Dead, which is a huge, huge thing in Mexico. And because none of that was ever translated over, much like TNA never explained why the ring has 8 sides or 6 sides, whatever it were. It's just make it up, but give them some reason, not just, hey, we're different because we have a different looking ring. Some of those things I think sometimes in wrestling are where the wrestling business will often go into a lot of these types of diatribes. Okay, so this guy's got a great buzz here or there. He's over big in Japan or Mexico. and they expect them to come here when there's by and large been no history for them here. And more so, there's no history to the whole backstory to why the makeup or the masks and things. It's just expected that because they're a big star someplace else, that they come in, and if they don't bring that with them, there's, well, he's maybe not as over as we thought he should be. Weekly episodic wrestling television needs a lot of content, and it needs a lot of compelling content when you're putting that stuff out there. And this is one of the places where you see, especially when wrestling becomes so prodigious on television, so much of it was being shown every week in the States. Came this argument of how many pay-per-views is too much, what's not enough. And they were thinking more on that side of the fence as opposed to, well, that just means we have to fill up more content. And, you know, if your A show, your B show, and your C show spends, say, 35 of the 46 minutes on covering what's going on in the A show, then that gives you less time to get your stuff over to the B show. The very fact that there was as much wrestling on TV at this time in America screams out all the more reason for filling it up with different content. So why not on one of your shows give this content to who is Vampiro? Why is his face painted? What makes him that character? Fill that stuff in as opposed to, well, here he is. Well, he ain't getting really over like we thought. He's not getting those big reactions like he did in Mexico. And, you know, again, I think it's just the weaknesses in hindsight of having the luxury of 30 years of hindsight to be able to look back at, or in this case, 30 years, right? No, 20 years, 2003, to look back at this and say, okay, well, we can play Monday morning quarterback on it, but it really is, by my estimation, the failing of our business, of our industry, and not taking that, because there is a very compelling story there. And with so many kids watching wrestling at that time, those kids, I guess, would have gone along on that ride. And this is the period where you're seeing wrestling sort of wrestle with itself and wringing its hands of, okay, well, we got these adult fans that are looking for this, but we also have kid fans that are looking for that, and somehow trying to meander between those two. And I think they just completely dropped the ball, because Vampiro certainly knows how to get a pop. And, you know, the industry, like you'd mentioned, that, you know, he never quite got over to the degree here that he was in Mexico. And I think that's our business's fault. Nothing he did wrong. It's, you know, they just missed the boat big time. Because again, there's a lot of content there that you could have filled up with that.
As I asked you to bring your microphone slightly closer to you in the Joe Rogan style, I'll just say this quick story. Apparently, Vampiro was in WCW, and Sting came up to him and just went, "Dude, it's not cool you wearing that white face paint. That's my thing." And Vampiro said, "Well, I've been doing it since 1984, so, I mean, how long have you been wearing it?" And Sting went, "All right." And that was it. Yeah. Didn't have a reply for that. So, back to your match, and, well, it's actually the post-match. Raven has lost. The head shaving begins as Shane taunts on the mic. It was almost a meme back in the day, because you can taunt your face like an absolute devil. Just while you're holding the mirror in his face. This is what you are, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you're taunting him on the mic. James Mitchell doesn't know how clippers work. So he's shearing Raven like a sheep that has wronged him in a previous life. He's just he's doing it the backwards way. And he's scalping poor Scotty, and he's legitimately scarring his head. He had a great head of hair until that, and then he scarred so much of his follicles, basically. He's basically gave him alopecia, basically, to a point. Yeah. And backstage... No, actually, I'll save that for a bit. Mike TNA yells over the microphone, "This sucks, I've lost my objectivity, and I don't give a damn." And the credits roll. So, from what you remember of James Mitchell not knowing how clippers work and scalping Scotty with just blood pouring down all over the place. The first thing I remember, the clippers in my memory as not working well. So, like, he was like trying to get the hair off, and so, like, when I'm watching the playback and it's zip. I mean, why is it coming off a lot easier than I thought it was? And in my recollection, I recalled it that, like, it had scraped his head, like he had scratches on his head. And there's the one camera angle where his head from behind jutting back, and you can see, like, there's an entire strip of skin gone.
on top of his head. And I'm like, oh my God. I know we joked about it at the time, like the scalping and everything, but when you see that, and I'm sure Scotty, probably felt it, but when you're in the ring and doing that stuff, you're not really feeling stuff like as much as you would if you were just going to do it to your head right now. But I remember looking at that and like literally my mouth, like, oh my God, they ain't kidding. Like we really did scalp them, or James really did scalp them. And, just seeing that like strips of skin being cut off and then the blood coming. I remember Raven getting to the back. He was pretty upset, but I don't think James, because again, like in my memory, it was like he said, I have to like it wasn't quite working. And when I'm watching it, zip, and well, okay, that's different than I remember.
No, these were like wired ones, so they're not like the battery powered ones. These are wired ones, and when I wasn't really being facetious, like shearing a sheep. They were almost like sheep clippers. They were huge things, so they were going to get the job done.
Yeah, and like you said, you're supposed to go front to back, right, and pull the hair up.
No. He put the sharp bit downwards and dug it into his head. It doesn't matter which way you do it.
Yeah.
But you have to hold them. You have to have the flat metal bit on the scalp, not the putty teeth. Doing that, digging it. So that's why it was stripping his skin. Crazy.
Oh my God. Yeah. When like I said, in my recollection, it was like it had scratched his head, like like cut like singular cuts. And there's that one camera shot where his head is back, and then you can see like the 1.5 inch long skin stripped out. I was like, Jesus God. That was I can see now why they call it a scalping, because it literally was a scalping. And I've got to ask Scotty that, because like, as he's sitting there, you don't see him like, oh, hey, that hurts, easier or whatever. So I'm guessing that he probably didn't quite feel it, because again, it was like zip. But boy, when you see that entire gouge off his scalp, it's just like, woof. Yeah, it's crazy.
Now, not on the greatest authority, but I did read, it was reported that Raven tried to punch Mitchell in the back.
Yeah, like I said, I remember, I don't know if he tried to punch him, but I remember him being, pretty angry in the back, as you can imagine, right? But by that time, there's, being sweaty and scalpy, there's still hair stuck to his head, and it had bled over, and so you weren't sure if it's like a razor blade cut, is this a wrestling cut, or is it which is probably why I never had the recollections of having seen that camera angle, and that, I would have been pissed too. I mean, that's a life altering thing, especially for those of us that are well coiffed, right? I mean, it's a career ender. It's boy, that's amazing.
I'm sorry, mistimed interrupting you there. I do apologize. Right, so a fan sent this in. I know we've done our fan question thing, but I actually saved this because it's perfect timing. So it's a chap called Ben, and he also describes himself as a fellow Beaver County wrestling fan. So,
oh, nice.
He says, my name is Ben, and I used to work at a grocery store near Pittsburgh where Shane would shop. And he says, sorry for always pestering you with wrestling questions. I remember a specific day in 2003, I believe, where I was working and Shane came in riding one of those motorized shopping carts. When I asked if he was okay, he said he had broken his ankle at a show. I remember asking how he would be able to wrestle in an NWA TNA that Wednesday against Raven in their hair versus hair match, I think. And Shane told me he would just wrap it extra tight to put his boot on and grit his teeth to make it through the match. I asked why he wouldn't just tell someone in management that you're hurt, and Shane said, if you tell someone you're hurt, they take you off the card, they give you that they give that spot to somebody else, and you lose a payday, so you tough it out. Does Shane remember this, and could he give some background to the story and talk about getting through the Raven match with a broken ankle? Is this true? You had a broken ankle going through it?
I would have said no, except that story. I don't know if he's maybe conflating the dates, because I don't look in any way hobbled in the ring. So I'm wondering if he didn't mix something up on his side. But around that time, I did break an ankle, but I wish I could say it was fighting for a title someplace. I had gone to walk into my shed, and I had a wooden, a platform made of wood that was basically like 2x4s on their sides, so like the water could run through, and it had rotted. And so when I stepped on that, like went to like step on it and into the shed, my ankle went through and twisted and fractured my ankle on the dumbest of things. And that would have been right around that time frame, early 2000s. So I'm guessing that Ben somewhere has it mixed up, a timeline in his head. I can't recall exactly when that was. I'm thinking it would have been a little bit later than that. But again, I can't say the guy's lying. I don't know, because I can't peg down exactly when that was. I'm sure I could go back and look at doctor bills or something and figure it out. But in that time frame, I did break an ankle, and I for the life of me, I'm sitting there trying to like dig for it. I can't recall if it was before that. I am certain as I can be watching it, that wasn't just, okay, I braced my ankle or taped it up, because if you've ever broken a bone, it's not, you can't just cover it up that easily. And there's no point where you see me hobbling in that match. To the contrary, at the beginning of the match, Raven throws me out and comes out after me. I roll back in, and then we do that a couple times. It must be wrong on the timeline on his side. Sorry, Ben, if that's not a better answer for you. But I'm positive in watching that match that I wasn't on a broken ankle.
But it was somewhere around that time. Annoyingly, I put this in the wrong place. This little known trivia fact: the planned finish of the CM Punk Raven hair versus hair match that was going to happen in Ring of Honor, but then ended up happening. It didn't happen. It was meant to be Tommy Dreamer making the save when Raven was going to be double teamed, but then turned on Raven, costing him his hair. I don't know if that was going to be in TNA or Ring of Honor. I've messed up that bit of fact, but anyway. Right. I'm going to ask you a fairly heavy question here. So from everything we've talked about on our shows, on my show, and that you've given to other interviews, so I don't think I'm talking out of school here, and you've also mentioned that you were coming off the Oxycontin, or at least trying to at that time. I can't enjoy the match as much as I should, because I know you're suffering, I know you're sick, and you've said in a previous episode that you're going through, a divorce, and you're going through just a load of different things. So as I know you better than obviously, I suppose, most people watching this, it sort of breaks my heart a little bit knowing that you're going through all these different things, personal and physical issues at the time. Can you watch these matches at this time and not sort of have your mind taken back to how you're feeling at these?
No, it definitely does suck me back to that. As much as you try not to, like, it'll pop. Like last night, I didn't sit down and go, okay, this is that time frame, and put a bit of a up. But as I'm watching it, I can see by the shape that I'm not in, that's the first giveaway. And because there was so much, I think the fans know, how in love I am with my boys. That Caden had just. No, Cade wouldn't be born. He wouldn't be born until 2005. So Connor's young, and pretty much oblivious to this. And it was a stage in my life where if there's one person on the planet that I should have been able to count on, it would have been my spouse. And instead, I was getting threats. You'll never see your kid again and stuff like that, which only further pushed me into the shell. Like, I can't even talk to her about this. And so, you're getting it at work. You're getting it from home. Your son is oblivious to it. And, I still have enough of my wits about me to know that, like, I'm taking a amount of this Oxycontin that should be deadly. And each time you're throwing these pills in your mouth, it's basically playing Russian roulette. But you're stuck on it. You're hooked on it. And, through this time, and it's by no means saying like I deserve a medal for any of this or whatever. It's speaking the truth. There wasn't a time that I was, from the moment, like months into taking Oxycontin, that I was addicted to it, physically conditioned to it, and physically dependent would be the actual phrase. That I didn't want to put a gun barrel right behind the dose. It was, I was the guy that never did drugs in my life and never had any interest in it. I was, my friends and I could get enough laughs off just being stupid goofballs like we were. And I just was always terrified of doing those. There was a girl named Karen Ann Quinlan. This is around 71, 72, 16, 17, 18-year-old girl that went to a party, drank a beer, by all reports, drank a beer and took a pill. Lapsed into a coma for like 29 years before they took her off the life support. And I always thought, like, I'm not the guy that has the best luck. So if that's going to happen to somebody, it probably happened to me, which is, again, I had no propensity in my life to ever want to do any kind of drug. But when a doctor prescribes something to you, that's where my naivete came in, was like, okay, well, this is from a doctor. And
it's a miracle drug, wasn't it? They told you.
Miracle drug, quote, exactly from their documentation, Purdue Pharmaceuticals, the one that the Supreme Court here in America is soon to hear the case on. So I had tried through those 5 years dozens and dozens and dozens of times. I had gone through 5 what's called rapid opiate detoxes, which were $5,000 to $7,000 each. It wasn't like, hey, I'm just going to keep on, I'm having a great time here and this is going to have some jollies here. But I was also scared to death, and not being able to talk at work about it, not being able to talk at home about it. I've got a small child at home that's witnessing this, although oblivious to it, thank God, up to a point. That there's the weight of that, that slams you at times. Certainly not something I'm proud of, but like I said from day one, whenever I did the interview in TNA, if I don't talk about this, it will give off the connotation that I should be ashamed of this. And I was never ashamed of it. That's why I've talked about it publicly, because I now know, as I knew then without knowing, there are millions of people around the world that have endured the same thing, whether it's Oxycontin or something else. If I try to hide it and it leaks out, and it will certainly leak out at some point, the connotation should be, hey, if you have a problem out there, hide it, conceal it. Hey, dummy, don't tell anybody because bad things will happen to you. And I didn't want that to be the stigma. So I spoke publicly about it. And I think in a lot of ways cut the legs off the argument. Like if somebody comes and says, well, what about this or what about that? Okay. And I've spoken about that. And like now we'll openly answer those questions. But I do want to talk to people out there right now that are watching this episode that may know somebody, a loved one, a friend, a spouse, a child, or a friend that's going through something like this. Get them help. Let them talk about it, because it really is the crux point. Concealing it and making threats to that person, you'll just make them better liars, is all you'll do, until you get the phone call, hey, that person's gone. So if you really love that person, you really care about that person, fight Satan and God above both on this thing if you have any attempt to save your loved one's life. But for me, what became therapeutic is talking about it. And, that letting other people know, come up and say, and I think at the time I said, like, if there's one person that's out there right now that can be saved by this, or, not make the mistakes that I've made. And over the years, I've probably had 2-3 dozen people come up and say, hey, just want to say thank you. I was going down the same path, and when I heard your story, and so like I can't ask anything better. That's the best payoff I ever got. So it's there are so many people. And I mean, just take a look around. It's the people say the opiate disaster in this country. It's worldwide, this stuff going on. And now the fentanyl that's being put in with it is even deadlier than that stuff was. And, as a parent, it scares you. And I've had these same conversations with my kids. I've talked openly with my kids as long as they've been old enough to understand what it is we're talking about, because this is as real a thing that that exists in the world today. Like when you, as a parent or as a loved one, you worry yourself over the what if. Say, what if the satellite falls on my kid's head or whatever? This stuff is real, and it's right there in my hometown, which I've told you before, sort of like Mayberry. I had a guy several years ago tell me, I can get heroin within 5 minutes of this place. And come on, seriously? He goes, 3 minutes that way, 2 minutes that way. You're talking bullshit, right? And I'll look at some right now. Like, no, I'm not asking for it. I said, but it's that ubiquitous here in New Brighton, Pennsylvania. And yes, it's overrun. It's it really, really is a major, major thing that now, sadly, because of all these other stupid headlines, it's sort of been pushed to the back seat. Like, no, okay, well, everybody knows about that. We don't really have to keep talking about it. Yes, you do, because it's for me the fact that I could go public with it and I had an outlet to do that with was hugely helpful. But that was step one of 1,000 steps. And the next thing that was most helpful to me is I can't shut my brain off. And so, like I was telling Chris the other day, you'd be dry, like in the middle of this conversation, we'd be doing an interview, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, my brain would go, take an Oxycontin. You're okay. Take an Oxycontin. And it wouldn't stop. It wasn't like you could say, okay, well, what were we saying, James? It was that until you finally went, okay, screw it, just go take one.
How long did that last after you?
Minimum 6 months. Minimum 6 months. I took my last dose December 22nd, 2005, and put myself in the hospital in end of February, and for I would say into that fall, before I started getting a little better. Like it wasn't okay. 6 months and I'm back to perfect. The whole time you're sort of bottoming it out, and you're getting a little bit better, and it took forever because my body was so inundated with that stuff. Your brain receptors and things, the endorphins, that your feel good hormones, they have the same chemical shape as the opiates. So those opiates latch onto your brain receptors like a key into the keyhole. Once that's filled up, nothing else can get in there. And it takes the longer you take that stuff, it takes longer and longer to get off of it. And so for me, I was able to wrap myself in NA meetings, Narcotics Anonymous. And I'd stayed away from those places like the plague prior, fearful that if I would show up at one of these meetings, someone would go, hey, I was just at a meeting and Shane Douglas was there. And, so it was like, you felt like a rat in a corner. Like there was nowhere you could turn to get anybody to go, hey, I understand this talk. And that in its own way was so confining. But when I came out of there, because I can't shut my brain off, I took myself around. They tell you to do 90 meetings in 90 days. I did 90 in 35 days because I literally drove all around Florida, meeting to meeting to meeting. And what that did was just chewed up my time. I didn't have free time to stop and think about that stuff. And since then, you'll hear people say, well, today, James, is my 30,000th day clean. I stopped thinking about that a long time ago because it just kept reminding me of it. Like I don't want to think about that, nor do I want to forget it. And I've said all the time, if I ever felt an urging to take that kind of garbage again, I'd immediately get to a meeting or go talk to somebody. But it's for the loved ones out there, I know it seems like such an impossible thing because you get this screw you don't know what you're talking about. You're going to get all kind of pushback. Take it and just keep going with a smile on your face and keep going, because if not, we know how that movie ends. And it is a very real thing. And I'm just thrilled to have been there. It struck me when my oldest son was in second grade. And we had moved back to Pittsburgh by then. Marriage is split up by now. And he went to performing arts school. So every holiday they would have a Easter thing, play. They'd have a Christmas play. And it was Christmas time. So his class in the second grade did Frosty the Snowman. And I noticed really quickly when he would come out on stage, because his mother would sit as far away from me as she could. When he came out on stage, he wouldn't look for her, he'd look for me. And so when he'd see him, give him like, hey, man, that's cool. And he came out on the stage, and during the Frosty the Snowman, had this big white puff ski jacket on him. And he came out and he did this little dance at the front of the stage, and he backed in line. I looked at him and I went like that was fucking cool, dude. And this big smile went across his face. He was as proud as a peacock. And the next second, boom, the planet fell on my head. Because I thought, what would this boy be doing right now if I weren't here? And I shouldn't have been there. And the guilt of that was debilitating. But so now that's why I marvel so much at what my kids are doing. Connor and his music with Dan Devane's, my son as the athlete is a much better athlete than I was at that age. I marvel at this. I watch these kids. I'm like, man, like every day you're here. I tell people every morning, they'll say, "Hey, open my eyes today. We're still above ground, so that's good." It's and that's why. And not to sound corny, I'll wrap it with this. It's after getting off that stuff, you go through that long, just miserable period. And then like one day you wake up and you go, somebody's cutting grass. Or, hey, man, the sun's really bright this morning. Just these crazy things that you've paid zero attention to for years prior. And suddenly you start smelling the grass and the flowers and the sunrises and the sunsets. And I still find value in all of that stuff. I know it sounds corny for the franchise character, but I just, being alive is an incredible thing. And, having the opportunity to make tomorrow a better day for us than it was today, or better than, made the day after that better than tomorrow. That's what we get the chance to do when you're alive. Once you're in that hole, that's it, all said and done. So, enough said about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always appreciate when you talk about this, because I think it is, as you say, very important to sort of remove the shame of it, especially in your case where you were hoodwinked into taking it in the first place with bad information drawn up by the company themselves. Sure. We've got a few minutes left in this show, so I'm going to give you some news following the show. Some of it amusing, some of it, sadly, not very much, and it's actually going to go to what you were just talking about before, but I'm going to give you the less important news now. Goldberg defeats a legitimately injured Triple H for the WWE Raw World title. Shortly after this show, Triple H and Stephanie McMahon get married for real, 25th of October. Amazing Red around this time, which is a name that you don't hear very much, but I really liked Amazing Red back in the day.
Oh, I did too.
Yeah, badly injures his already injured knee in Japan and requires some 9 months off. Now, this is the most amusing of the stories, is Randy Savage, shortly after the show, releases Be a Man, his rap record, where he releases a diss song on Hulk Hogan and a tribute to Mr. Perfect. During an interview on MTV, Savage said, "The fans are demanding it, especially when you get to the hip-hop culture. We got him boxed in right now." This is him talking about Hulk Hogan. "And I think the fans want to see Hogan and Savage fight it out one more time at WrestleMania," he specifically mentions afterwards. And then, here's the weirdest thing. Randy Savage, on the same night as the NWA TNA pay-per-view where you main evented, did not have a good night because he was scheduled to do a concert at a place called Mr. B's, a restaurant nightclub in Treasure Island, Florida. Bubba the Love Sponge, who is Hogan's best friend, which makes him Savage's worst enemy. I'm sorry, this is directly from Wrestling Observer newsletter, so I have to do the spelling errors as well. Took it upon himself to ruin the show. So essentially what Bubba did was get loads of his fans to go to the show and boo Randy Savage while he was miming his rap record. He's lip-syncing it. And to make things even worse, the CD skipped.
Oh, Jesus.
So, amazing.
Yeah.
And
oh, my Lord.
Yeah.
Anything else go wrong?
Well, it all went wrong. In fact, even worse, some of the people who turned up started shouting "New Bane" and "You crapped your pants at Gold's Gym" at Randy Savage, which I don't know what that story is, but apparently Randy must have known. So, yeah, after 3 songs, Randy Savage got very annoyed, down the mic, stormed off, and ended the concert. So, incredible scenes there. Now, just while I just time code that one, I actually have, sadly, this is sort of like the bad news to end it on, I hate to say, like I did with the previous NWA TNA review that we did. 2003, and you alluded to this, I don't know if it was this episode, the last NWA one, 2003 is the year that I personally remember being a horrible, horrible year for the deaths of a lot of wrestlers. And I'm going to give you a few that sort of bookend the NWA TNA pay-per-view that we were talking about before, a few weeks beforehand and afterwards. One person you won't probably know is a guy called Kent Walton, but anyone of a certain age, anyone basically older than me who watched wrestling, he was the legendary commentator of World of Sport for 33 years, I think. Started in 1955. He passed away of cancer August 24th. Excuse me, my voice is going now. Then, here's one for you. The Great Antonio. If you remember that name, he's most famous for getting his head kicked in by Antonio Inoki when he stopped cooperating in that match, which was incredible.
Yes.
Stu Hart passes away October 16th. And we're going to get to the most tragic of both of them. Road Warrior Hawk dies the 19th of October, but because you were talking about your battles with Oxycontin, and this won't have obviously gone unnoticed, is Anthony Pitbull to Durante passes away 25th of September at the age of, my age in fact, 36.
And his wife. Yes.
Yeah, leaving the children alone home for several days, which is just a horrible, horrible story as well. I think at this point, we don't need to dwell on that anymore. I think it'd be nice to end the show on a nice story about Anthony Durante, who obviously wrestled many, many times with feuding with the Pitbulls and everything, but some Pitbull stories to end us on.
Well, Anthony was just a good friend, and I people ask me this, and I really do believe they ask me, like, what do I think was my best match in my career, or my best time in the business, and I really feel that working with Anthony was that time. I'd fallen into the franchise character comfortably; it fit like a glove, and he was so strong. Just a powerful, powerful man that he was able to throw my big ass around at 253 like I was a sack of potatoes. And so because he so trusted me, that like a lot of times you go to the ring like hesitant because you're not sure if this guy's going to work along with you or put the same effort in. And I never had to worry that with Anthony. So like when he'd be pressing me over his head and throwing me, if you watch closely, I'm upside down taking the bump, I'd scream, beat your chest, and he'd start beating his chest. It was just really, really comfortable working with him. So I started getting to the point, like, because we were working so closely together, where I would just jag with him a little bit every night, just see how far I could push him and yank his chain a bit, and he I don't know if you noticed or not, but Anthony's bald. He's not as well.
We like to say follicularly challenged or something like that.
Yes. He's not as follicularly gifted as some of us, but he. So he comes down to the room and we're talking. I, pop in his dress and like, hey, you got to brush like a bar real quick. My hair. Start digging into his bag and he look up and go like, and every time I did like 5 or 6 times, and he'd start looking at him like, I'm like, dude, you're bald. You don't have a brush in there. It's. But he just really a good guy, man. It's become cliche. I say that so often, but my understanding is he and Gary had, some really interesting jobs along the way. I never saw that side of those guys. Both of them great guys. But when I heard the story about Anthony, and there was a connection to his wife because his wife was a Brazilian girl that had worked for a guy who had started as my driver and then would later become the head of merchandising in ECW, Damian Farron, who himself had passed away 7 years ago. No, my God, it's crazy. But she had danced at a club that he managed. And so he started bringing her to shows, and they fell in love, and just a really beautiful girl. And they, got married, had these kids. And then, a couple of years later, you hear this story and it's just so ghastly. That again, like it breaks my heart that Anthony or his wife didn't know that they could reach out to me or somebody else, to get that help. And so that's why I said, like what I said a few minutes ago, that, they're, on the outward appearance, Anthony didn't need anything from anybody. Big, powerful guy, beautiful wife, beautiful family. And sometimes, as you find out, there's a lot of times when people have that big, shiny house on the hill and you go look in the windows and there's no furniture. There's an emptiness there. And when I heard that, and then I heard about the kids, thank God they were of the age they won't remember that. But, that's about as horrific as it gets. Like when you start talking about that kind of thing, and it was, getting so close to home. I mean, this was like just working its way closer and closer. That all the guys we lost in ECW, and because there really was a family aspect to that it just started taking on like new parameter, and yeah, no, enough said about that. It's good dude. All these guys gone way too soon. And why I was given the blessing of being able to survive it, I don't know, but I won't look that gift horse in the mouth. And hope to be able to be some voice of reassurance to people out there who are in that position, because it is incredibly hopeless. It's depressing. It's demoralizing, especially for people that have been successful at things. And, it's just give me a plan. Tell me, do A, B, C, D, and I can get on that plan and do it. It's a lot more convoluted than that. And there's often something at work that they're anesthetizing themselves to. And a lot of times, as I found out, there's probably things that you're not even aware of cognizantly that you're contributing to. And it wasn't until I had a counselor tell me, like, well, it sounds to me like you're, trying to do this and trying to do that and save a marriage that ain't salvageable, and just went down this washing list. And my first gut reaction was like, fuck you, you don't know me. You can't say that stuff. And then so I'm driving home and I'm like, oh, he's right on that. He's right on that. He's right. Well, hell, he's right on everything. And that just opened my eyes a little bit to it, like to see what it was. And so like to see like with Anthony and again, like how many different people we've lost, both from ECW and the other federations. There was a genocide time in this business. And the good thing to come out of that is, from what I understand, like I'm talking to Taz and his son and other younger guys in the business, that this current generation seems to have by and large learned from that, thank God. Because it would be even more depressing than it already is if it were to be all those people died at these super young ages and there not be a moral to that story. So, fortunately there is, and it's just every time you talk about these guys, it takes you back to a place. I wish I could step into a time machine and go back to when they were still here, because you miss interacting with those guys and asking for the brush and things like that. That just made the night go by a little bit faster. But good dude, and his wife was a beautiful lady, and sad.
I remember I've spoken to Gary Wolf a couple of times, interviewed him once, and I remember saying, almost euphemistically, because I like to broach these subjects, with kid gloves, and I said, I always heard that in the ECW locker room that you and Anthony were the guys who could get you, providers in that kind of sense. And Gary went, oh yeah, we could get you anything. He was just like completely out there. Like, oh, don't worry, we're a one-stop shop, baby.
right. Yeah. He's, I think he'd probably tell you the same thing, being that he was in that world. As you can imagine, there's probably not a lot of guys that survived that world, and coming through unscathed. But he and I had a long talk about, after this happened to Anthony and the other people, and we're great friends to this day. And when we see each other, we can pick that conversation right up. Same type of thing. Like, he had been in that world, submersed in that world, came into wrestling, and, but he's still standing. He's still here. And, for the double whammy, not just, they could get you whatever they wanted, but the stuff that they were doing, it's but by the grace of God, right? That they're still here. And I'm glad that I still have enough of those friends that I can still sit down and talk to similar experiences that experienced the same stuff with. But it's also like a bittersweet time to us when we talk about it. Like, when me and Freddie are hacked together, all of us, we get to Jerry, and this will invariably come up. And I think it makes our remaining friendships even stronger, because it's like there aren't many of us left, or as many as there should be. And a realization that we got to experience something incredibly unique in wrestling that rarely existed before, that hasn't existed since. And I don't think we all give it enough of, we're all appreciative and thankful for it. Don't get me wrong there. I don't think we take time to slow down and think towards, hey, thank you. Appreciate that I had that opportunity, because it was an amazing amount of fun. And, if it hadn't been for that fun that we had then and all those great matches and angles and all the things that we did in that building, if a guy named Anthony Durante and his wife had died from an overdose, and I'd never been to wrestling and never knew those guys, that wouldn't, okay, it's a blurb in the paper, move on to the next page and the next thing. I got the good fortune of being able to work with, meet him, work with him, know his wife, and know what kind of people they were. And I can tell you this without hesitation. I think it would underscore like what I said earlier about the hopelessness of being in that situation. Both of them love their kids dearly, and would have wanted both of their parents to have survived. So the fact that they were willing to, in any other semblance of their life thinking, hey, this ain't a good idea, you and I both doing this together, and kids being here unsupervised at that very young age. Somewhere in the haze of that, they had lost sight of that. And, I can't think of anything that any parent on the planet would find to be more important than that. And yet that's where they were. So if you're out there and know somebody out there, please seek the help, talk to them, do whatever you have to do to get it, because that's a one-way street that will end in a really, really bad place.
An important message to end it on as well. And that is the end of our podcast. So thank you very much, everybody, for watching. As I said, as I forgot to say at the beginning of this episode and meant to say on every episode, ShaneDouglasQuestions@gmail.com. If you want to submit a question for the franchise to potentially answer on a future episode, our monthly fan question episodes. We're out every Tuesday. Of course, you probably know that by now. And also we've got the YouTube channel, Shane Douglas Official. Links are in the description, you know the score. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'm going to give it to Shane to sign us out.
Appreciate you being here, sitting under the learning tree and hearing about how I puked in a match and about my great friends that we lost too soon. Hopefully it didn't sound too preachy to you. Appreciate you being here at the Franchise University.